Hi, everyone, and welcome to Studio Jake. I, of course, am your host, Jacob Airy. Thank you for joining me today. I have a very special guest. He is an old pal of mine. We've been friends for so many years. He and I got started together writing for a now defunct website called Conservative News. Since then, we both love cinema. We have so much to talk about because he and I were both creative. He on the film side, me on the writing side. So I am very excited today to have on my good friend, filmmaker. He's a filmmaker. He's the director, writer, producer, editor, and star of his film Exemplum, which you can watch on Tubi and I believe here on YouTube. So I'm very excited. Please welcome to Studio Jake, Paul Roland.
Hey, how are you, Jacob? Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I know we've been trying to do this off and on for a few years now, so I'm very excited to have you on to talk about one of the most enigmatic characters I think in film and now in TV, which is Tom Ripley.
Yeah, it's he definitely has. He's captured people for decades with several adaptations. So there's definitely something to the character that keeps drawing us back to him.
It is, and I've read the original novel by Patricia Highsmith. By the way, she was a terrible person in her personal life, but that's neither here nor there. Terrible people can make good novels and films and everything in between, obviously. But one of the things that I've noticed that people tend to debate about, and we'll get into this more when we talk comparatively, is Tom Ripley is not a protagonist; he's an antagonist in the series. And normally, I don't like you and I have actually talked about this in the past. I normally don't like films or works of media where the villain is, I don't want to say portrayed heroically, but kind of gets more of a spotlight than more of a traditional hero. But I seem to make an exception with Tom Ripley, with the novel, with the films I've seen, and now with the Netflix series Ripley. And I'm curious, what do you think it is that connects readers and audience members to Ripley as a character?
Well, he's supposed to represent the perfect sociopath, in a sense. He is a monster, but it's sort of like it's not. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what it is that I do think there is something about the idea of presenting to you what it is that evil really is in its natural form. And we always like to think of evil as this thing that's just right there. Always, yeah, yeah. It's like, oh, you can see it. It's like, oh yeah, that's a monster right there. But Tom Ripley is a devil, but he is charming. He's good looking. He's incredibly smart. He's able to ingratiate himself with high society. I think that's what I think on a primal level we love. I think being warned about these types of people, to be suspect naturally. That's where I think that's the catharsis that we get out of a guy like Tom Ripley, and maybe that's what draws us to him. I mean, I think there's always something fascinating about watching a person sort of live in the shadows and see how they navigate those areas. But if I had to guess what it is on a fundamental level that drives us to Tom Ripley, it's probably that.
I would agree, and I have watched the Netflix series in its entirety, and I've reviewed it. Everyone who's watching can go read my review. I'm not going to rehash it here, but I'm curious. You said the pilot and the follow-up episode, and I'm curious what you think about it. To start to pull you in, what's your overall first impressions of the show?
Well, there's no doubt that Steven Zaillian's direction and Robert Elswit's cinematography is masterful. I mean, the shots are just brilliant. The period details are wonderful. You feel like you're there. The problem that I'm having with the show, especially in comparison with the Matt Damon film and the Alan Delon film Purple Noon, I just feel the casting is way off on these characters. I think Tom is too old. Andrew Scott's a wonderful actor. Way too old to be playing Tom Ripley. And the actor playing Dickie, for blanking on his name right now, I also think he's too old to be
Johnny
playing.
Flynn.
Yeah, Johnny Flynn. They're all game. I just think they're too old for it. I mean, I think these characters work if they're either in their early 30s or late 20s. So that's the number one strike against it. The second strike against it is that, I think Tom is supposed to represent the perfect sociopath. Like I said before, you don't see this guy coming in any way, shape, or form. He is a man that you can be with at parties, who is charming, who is seductive, and in that seduction, that's what gets you off guard, and why he kills you and takes your money and all this. And and Andrew Scott just, even my wife was looking at it and was like, oh yeah, he's suspicious. He's got something malevolent about him, and that just doesn't work. Matt Damon had an aspect to Tom Ripley that was like that. But he was good looking and he was charming. But he did have a certain awkwardness to him that I also didn't feel fit. And there was this kind of like tragedy to his character, this sort of like outsider looking in. I don't think that works with Tom Ripley. I really do think the best adaptation of him so far has been Purple Noon. Alan DeLon is exactly that. He's just this perfect soul. He's almost like this machine, this demon that's incarnate, that's among humanity.
The one problem I had with Purple Noon is, and again, this is just because I've read the source material, was it kind of started the fad of Dickie and Marge being a couple, and that's not actually in the book. They're more like friends with benefits, but they make it clear they are not in any sort of like permanent relationship, because Dickie's a party boy and Marge doesn't really. She just hangs around him because he's a good time and he pays for everything. She's just a lot nicer about it than say Tom is. But I do but I will say this about Purple Noon. I do agree with you that the actor who portrayed Ripley in that one, he was a cut above. And one of the things that also got me with the Ripley series was the casting of Freddie Miles. They casted a British pop singer as Freddie, and it's kind of annoying because Freddie's supposed to be American. He's supposed to be the spoiled American. Off air, you use the term jovial. I think that's the perfect way to describe him. He's living off mommy and daddy's money. But the Netflix series tried to portray Freddie as this more stoic, staunch, upper crust British person, and I don't think that worked really well for the character. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman, in The Talented Mr. Ripley with Matt Damon, I think portrayed that character much better. The name of the actor from Purple Noon escapes me, but I also think he did a better job as well. What did you think about that?
Yeah, no. The casting of Freddie was immediately off. I noticed that the second Elliot Sumner walked on. I mean, it's also not right for the time period that I could imagine if they were if they wanted to set Tom Ripley in the modern day, which I actually think would be fascinating. I'd love to see a Tom Ripley in the digital age, how he exists and cons people. I think you could use him almost as a perfect character in our social media age, in the age of influencers and Instagram. I think the show kind of missed an opportunity by setting it in the past. So that's number one strike against no knock against Elliot Sumner, who's probably a good actor, but it doesn't fit the time period, and it doesn't fit the source material. He's also Freddie's also a bigger guy than Tom Ripley, which makes him somewhat of an imposing threat. I mean, there's a whole scene in Purple Noon that's brilliant when, after he kills Freddie, he has to take him down the stairs, and he's a hulking figure. He's he's struggling to get him out there, and it makes for this extra layer of conflict. But in this show, it's clearly Freddie Miles is more just like an inconvenience rather than an actual challenge for him.
Yeah, it's true. And would you say, because you mentioned the actors in Purple Noon, who, as far as Ripley goes, who do you think portrayed Ripley the best of the ones you have seen?
Oh, Alan DeLon, by far. He is by far the best.
Highsmith also, when she passed away before the Matt Damon film was made, and also the one with or now I'm forgetting, but Ripley's Game and Ripley Underground. She passed away before those came out. But John Malkovich is who I was thinking of. But when The American Friend came out, which was an adaptation of Ripley's Game, and she didn't really care for Dennis Hopper's portrayal. She always said she preferred Delon as Ripley. She just didn't like the ending of Purple Noon, because the whole concept is, for those of you, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but the whole concept of it is Ripley always has to be looking over his shoulder. He never knows. He's living in a constant state of paranoia, and Purple Noon gave him a more, or at least implied a more of a comeuppance in the conclusion.
Yes, the ending of Purple Noon is like. No, I agree. The ending is somewhat. It's disturbing. There is a subtle really grotesque creepiness of the ending of Purple Noon, about how they pull the boat out of the water and then his body that's just been dragging there this whole time. It is very grotesque, and that was unsettling. But you're right about the whole, like, there is a kind of comeuppance for him in that, and I don't think that corrects it. I do think the talented Mr. Ripley had the right ending by having it close on, like, he's in this state for the rest of his life. He always has looking over his shoulder. I do think they make him a little bit more tragic than they should with that, because again, Tom Ripley is a machine. I don't think he's human in that regard. But they are correct in, like, this is him the rest of his life, always looking over his shoulder, always on the run. But Purple Noon, I do think that the biggest problem I had with the movie was the ending.
Yeah. And if I was to wager an opinion, I've watched all of the Ripley films. Actually, Ripley's Game and The American Friend, I didn't realize were connected, at least tangentially, to the talented Mr. Ripley. I didn't realize that till later. But the Ripley's Game kind of tries to be a pseudo sequel to the talented Mr. Ripley, except it's John Malkovich's Ripley, who he portrays the character a little bit more like a psychopath instead of a sociopath. And I know there's some nuance there. In my humble opinion, I actually think Barry Pepper is more like the books.
Okay.
Now, does that mean he was the best cinematically? That's up for debate. But just because one thing about Ripley in the books versus the films is he has a certain dark humor to him, and in Barry Pepper brought out that dark humor a little bit. Now, that movie had its own issues because it was very low budget. That one was Ripley Underground, but I still think, just as far as if we're looking directly at the source material, I feel like Barry Pepper was most like the source material. But as far as just overall, it's hard to give a decision, because they're all by different directors and they all have their own. I go back and forth because I tend to not like Euro films as much as I like American films, and that's probably my own bias against Euro cinema. But if Purple Noon definitely set the stage for it, I would say. It was, I'm so glad the one I saw was the restored version by the Criterion Classics, which they did an excellent job. Did you see that version, or
an
I
older
saw it
version? On the Criterion channel, so I assume that's the updated version, which I thought the quality was terrific. And, also to add on to that, speaking of quality, I obviously love black and white cinematography. My film is in black and white. I've got no knock against any director that wants to use it. I don't quite know if making all of Ripley black and white entirely works.
I agree with that as well.
Not because I think black and white is bad or wrong or anything like that. I think it's I think it also somewhat reflects the world view and the theme of Tom Ripley. But he's not there's film noir aspects of Tom Ripley, but he's not a film noir character, so to speak. There's this is a colorful person. He's a man in opulence. He's part of, high society. And I think to kind of, when you're in Italy, I can understand if you wanted to have parts of it, like in New York, it's in black and white, but there is a certain lacking by having it be in Italy on this, he's looking at the paintings of Caravaggio. He's in the churches he's supposed to have this envy of this life, and to remove it of its color, I think does undercut it a little bit.
Oh yeah, I actually thought that that was kind of weird. I was expecting it to transition to color in the finale, like he
Yeah.
finally got his way. That's what I was looking forward to. I will say, who surprised me though was Dakota Fanning. I thought she did play
Oh, I
Marge
loved it.
very well.
I love
Yeah,
her. I love Dakota. I've always been a fan of Dakota. Yeah,
yeah, and
she's.
I thought she did portrayed
Mhm,
Marge very well in this film.
mhm.
I still think Gwyneth Paltrow pulled out a slightly better performance in The Talented Mr. Ripley, but
Yeah.
I do think that Dakota Fanning, as far as what this show was trying to do, I think that she did a good job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm so far liking Dakota. I've always been a fan of her. I mean, going back when she was a kid, and I know she's kind of she hasn't reached the levels of stardom that her sister Elle has, but I still think that she's the most talented of the duo, and I'm glad to see her out there on this show, and I hope she keeps getting more bigger work because she's a wonderful gem. She's like Jodie Foster, great child actor, and I think she can be a great actress in her adult years as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you mentioned you felt like Ripley and Dickey were a little miscast. If you were casting this, who would you have put in place of Andrew Scott as Tom
Oh,
Ripley? I'm genuinely curious.
that's a really good question. I mean, I do think Andrew Garfield maybe 10 years ago would have worked
Yes, I agree with that.
as Tom Ripley. There's a lot of Ansel Elgort I think would have made a great Tom Ripley maybe. Yeah, there's a lot of different younger actors. I just don't think they're just too old. Andrew Scott's a wonderful actor. I think he's got a great. I think he's for what they've wrote Tom Ripley to be. I think it's pitch perfect for it. But I just don't think it works for who Tom Ripley is. It just doesn't make that. He's 47 years old.
Yeah,
And
Tom Ripley's supposed to be a college graduate at this
yeah,
point. He should be at the most, like you were saying, early 30s.
47 years old, Dickie's 42. I mean, like, it just the plot of hiring someone to go get your 42-year-old son just doesn't work for me. He's supposed to be in his late 20s, just kind of like being a party boy. So yeah, there was a big misstep there. And, it took me out of it. It took my wife out of it, no knock to the filmmaking. The filmmaking is wonderful. Again, the cinematography is great. The shot selection, gorgeous, long shots, the angles, just yeah. But I'm gonna finish it and see where it lands. But it's not hitting for me so far.
I understand. One thing too, though, I will say, and it was kind of a watching the whole series. I can say it was a relief to watch a Netflix show in particular that doesn't really dive into what the politically correct, the woke stuff, as I call it and others have called it. I will say that for it, like I said, with maybe the exception of the casting of Freddie Miles,
Mhm.
I did appreciate that of it. It was just nice to have a break where there's not a show where they take a 3-minute break to deliver some sort of soliloquy on current day politics. So
Yeah, no class.
that has been a nice
It's going to be
aspect of
really
it.
good to do a class warfare thing, but they haven't done that, so I do appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing too is in Patricia Highsmith made this very clear in interviews, and I know this because I've actually taken the time to read them. Uh, she was asked, "Is Ripley gay?" And she flat out said, "No, he's not gay. He's a con man, and so
Mhm.
sometimes he pretends to be gay to con his mark."
Yeah.
And I felt like that was one of the failings of The Talented Mr.
Yes,
Ripley
I agree.
is they went that route when it was I actually heard one commenter say that they just thought that the relationship between Ripley and Peter was more about Peter approves of Ripley and he just was flattered by this.
Mhm.
But and that's certainly a possibility. I can't get into the mind of the director for it, but that was one thing I didn't appreciate because all the other Ripley media had sort of avoided that, knowing Highsmith's comments.
Yeah, they clearly made in Talented Ripley, they clearly introduced a high level of homoeroticism into the film, which is fine if you want to explore that theme. But again, Tom again it goes back to he's a demon incarnate. He's a machine.
Mhm.
He's the perfect sociopath. I feel those are the sexual attraction to Dickie. And having being conflicted by sexuality is too human for him.
Right.
And again, I just don't. That didn't work for me either. Looking back, especially in comparison to Purple Noon, which I agree has its flaws, the ending and everything, but it just is, Tom is just this force of nature that's in these high societies, people's lives, and he's going to do what he's going to do. It's almost like, it's like, I feel like the best, movies that explore evil, Halloween is one of them. It's just like they just like evil exists and it just does its thing, and you have to just like figure out a way to adapt and move along with it. And that's what I feel Tom Ripley is there's no well, what's the deep psycho meaning? And no, he's just evil and just does.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a great point. Now, as you're a filmmaker, you released Exemplum, and I'm curious, as far as telling these kinds of stories where evil, you want to show evil, you want to, like you said, a force of nature, almost a machine-like presence. Besides Ripley, what are some other characters that you would say? Like, you mentioned Halloween. I'm guessing the Mike Myers, the original Mike Myers, not the countless remakes that have come since. But I'm curious, what are some other characters that or films or TV shows that you think are a good examination of evil from that sort of perspective, where there's no glorification, it's more, hey, this is real, this is out there, keep an eye out for it, basically. Do you have any other suggestions?
I would say, well, Seven to a degree, although Seven goes into a lot of different spiritual explorations with it, which is fascinating in its own right. Silence of the Lambs, a little bit. Yeah, there's a lot of, those are kind of the two off the top of my head.
I would say the Morgan Freeman film, I think it's called All the Pretty Girls, where he plays the James Patterson character, Detective Cross. I actually thought that was it's kind of older.
Girls is what you're talking about.
Say again?
I think it's Kiss the Girls.
That's right. I'm sorry, I was getting it confused with its sequel. Yeah, Kiss the Girls. That's right. With Morgan Freeman. I actually thought that, now that movie had some issues, but I thought that was a good look at to someone who is just so pure evil in the things that he does, how he this serial killer character. That was a really good exploration of that. Any final thoughts about Purple Noon, The Talented Mr. Ripley, or Netflix's Ripley?
No, I would just say, to people, even though I don't like them, I definitely think the people should look at all of these different adaptations of Ripley, because he certainly is a character that has warranted all of these looks throughout the decades, with Alan Delon and Matt Damon and now Netflix. So I mean, even if it doesn't register, I do think there's always something to kind of figure out. Like it may not be, this one may not hit, but it certainly makes me think about like Tom Ripley and his nature and what it is to understand about it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And speaking, you mentioned your film Exemplum is in black and white. And by the way, I'm not just saying this because I'm Paul Roland's friends. I'm also saying this as an audience member. I loved Paul's film Exemplum. You can go read my review on my website, but also check out Paul's film. It's available on Tubi and YouTube, correct?
Yes, that's it for free. I do highly recommend, if people can, to rent a high quality ad-free stream, either on Vimeo on demand, or you can rent one on YouTube as well, or on Google Play. You'll get a much better experience.
Yes, definitely do that. And so I know Exemplum's not going to be your last film. Now I won't spoil anything, but you and I have talked about our projects together, so I know you have other projects in mind. I'm curious, do you have anything planned? You don't have to give too much away. I'm just genuinely curious.
Yes, there is another script that I have written that I've built a pitch deck to. We're actively taking it to investors. We're just kind of in the initial stages of that. I'm just kind of closing up on a final round of promotion on Exemplum before I really hit the streets with that one. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna have another film. I'm definitely gonna have one. It's gonna keep making it happen.
That's fantastic news. And like I said, I'm not just saying this because I'm Paul's friend. Definitely check out Exemplum. And I mean, it's been all over the place. I've seen you on Babylon Bee. I've seen you on all sorts of news and podcasts talking about Exemplum. So I know it'll get some good steam going from those interviews. And if you were to say to someone, hey, if they're to ask you, hey, why should I check out Exemplum? What sets it apart? How would you answer?
Well, I would say what sets Exemplum apart is I do think that the concept and the premise is unique and hasn't really been explored in cinema yet. It's about a Catholic priest that records his confessions out of paranoia, and then he takes one of those recordings and blackmails a wealthy parishioner with it. It's film noir mixed with spiritual morality themes with a touch of medievalism in there. There just really is no movie like that. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, relevant themes to explore about the nature of cancel culture. And I say that as a more philosophical and moral precept rather than a political one, about the idea of taking people's sins and using them for power and in control. But I would say watch it for its very unique premise. And it's a wonderful throwback to 1990s independent cinema. That's why it's in black and white. That's why I put in the 8mm film grains. I want you to get the experience like you're watching a director from nowhere picking up a camera and making a cool little movie. So there you go.
That's really cool. And one last question about it. I'm curious because you directed and starred in it as well as did a plethora of other things for this movie. What was it like directing yourself? I've always wanted to ask a filmmaker that. What was it like directing yourself on set? Was it you're talking to a co-star and you're like, you know what, I didn't like that line, how I delivered it, or how do you go about that? That's something I've always wondered.
Incredibly difficult. I don't ever want to do this again, to be brutally honest with you, because it was very hard to do. When you see me on screen, literally 10 seconds before I yelled action, I was thinking about, how I'm going to shoot the next scene tomorrow, how I'm going to feed everybody, if we're going to have enough money. It was awful. But the only reason why I was able to do it is because I wrote the film, so I knew how to play Colin fairly well. I mean, when you're writing something and building it from the ground up, that's just what happens to you. So that was easy to do. So it was very easy for me to snap into character like that. But I also wouldn't have been able to do it without my cinematographer, Vlad Ionescu, because without him, there's just no way. He brought his A game on the lighting, and we would have a nice, good dialogue back and forth about how we're going to shoot the scene. And I'd be on camera. I'd say like, oh, maybe we should do this. And then he'd be like, oh, I can do over this. What do you think of this? And I'm like, perfect, beautiful. There's actually a good example of that. I just posted a clip on Instagram and YouTube of me doing that. I just was like, here's a little behind the scenes so you can get a feel of what it was like directing myself. And Vlad is there with me, us having the dialogue. He was instrumental.
That's fantastic. And where can people find out more about Exemplum and any other future projects you plan to announce?
Well, you can keep following me on social media, on Instagram and on X, at Roland Films. That's my handle, so please do so.
All right. And everyone else, be sure to like this video, share it out with all your friends. As everyone knows, I love promoting indie filmmakers and just letting everyone know that they're out there. So please check out Exemplum on, as he said, Vimeo, YouTube, Tubi, everywhere in between that you can get your hands on it. Google Play, I think, is one other place. Mm-hmm. And everyone, be sure to like, share, and subscribe here at StudioJake. I'm going to explore Ripley even further in an upcoming series I'm going to do called Lore Universe. So get ready for that. And this was kind of a preliminary conversation. So I could get someone else's perspective on Tom Ripley, which I'm very glad I invited Paul on to discuss it. Paul, thank you so much for coming on StudioJake.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here.
'Cause I've been living life right like I could just die any minute. Going for a ride down the side, PCH, country limit. I don't need a guide.